we'll start the recording and we'll press on then with the topic that we need to cover this evening. So at this point, let's set all of the distractions aside. Let's set aside all the electronic distractions, the phones and all that kind of stuff, Facebook, all that kind of stuff, set it all aside. And let's focus in very closely on the material that we need to cover this evening, okay? Because after all, you know that final exam is coming up, right? So the more that we can grip and understand now, the more finessed our final exam preparation will be. And by the way, just to confirm, I did send out that email indicating, of course, that the final exam, as I refer to my notes here, is scheduled for when? 10th of December, right? At 8:30 in the morning. Right, everybody? Right? December the 10th, 8:30 in the morning? Yep. So please do continue to monitor that. If there are any changes, please do let me know. And conversely, if I hear of any changes, without a doubt, I absolutely will let you know too. Because sometimes they change, eh? Like this comes down from the registrar's office. So sometimes, not often, very rarely actually, but sometimes they do change. So, you know, we want to monitor it all the time, right? So without further ado then, ladies and gentlemen, let's, details. I'll give you the details later on once I've set the exam and figured it out. I still have to figure it out. So let's carry on then. We want to talk about promotion, right? Promotion and customer relationship management, two very important topic areas, like all of the topic areas that we cover, actually. And so we'll move forward with these topic areas tonight. And specifically, when we talk about promotion, where are we located when we talk about promotion? Well, we're at the bottom of our overall course map, our overall marketing strategy, right? And so here we're talking about that big umbrella term, promotion, okay? So we're going to be drilling into that P, promotion, this evening and unpacking different pieces of that. Furthermore, at the back end of today, maybe for about the last half hour or so, we'll talk a little bit about customer relationship management, related aspects. Certainly very, very important there also. So again, when we are talking about promotion here, fundamentally, what are we talking about? How can we think about it? Well, we can think about it really in terms of the promotional mix or communication mix, right? And we have seen this before. I showed you this very same slide, in fact, when we talked about advertising and communications and advertising, right? And so the point that I made then, and I will repeat it now, is that when we talk about promotion, that P, promotion, residing under that P are a bunch of constituent elements, and these are the constituent elements that reside under that P that you see here. Direct marketing, advertising, sales, promotion, publicity, miscellaneous, and there's one other one that's not indicated here. Does anybody remember what that other one that is not indicated here that should be there? Anybody remember? Yes, Isam. Yes. Yep. Yuhan. Yep. Very good. Personal selling. That's exactly right. So when we talk about that, we have to remember personal sales is squarely in there. Key means by which we communicate with consumers, right? So all of this then packaging, packaging is a sort of fitting under the miscellaneous piece, yeah, for sure. So again, these are all the constituent elements that are residing under that promotion umbrella. And so again, tonight, we're going to take a deep dive into promotion and specifically into that sales promotion piece. So that's what we're going to be looking at tonight in more detail. And so we're going to be looking at different types of sales promotion, right? We'll be looking at the three major types: consumer-oriented, trade-oriented. Trade-oriented is, more B2B. And of course, the last major sales promotional approach will be retail. So those are the three major ones that we'll have a look at. So we'll start off spending a fair amount of time talking about some fairly low-end tactical kind of considerations associated with those three types. What they are, some examples, how they work, things to think about, that kind of a thing. And then we'll elevate our conversation into more of a strategic realm, where we'll talk about when and how to use some of these promotional efforts, and how to think of them strategically, specifically, some of the key objectives, when to use them, how to evaluate, and that kind of thing. So that really is what we'll be doing at the front end. And then, like I said, for about the last half hour or so, we'll talk a little bit about customer relationship management, talk about some advantages associated with it, what we want to do with CRM, some of the methods and programs associated with that. So that is basically what we're going to do tonight. CRM, very important, eh? I mean, more and more so now than ever before, I would argue. Marketers are really emphasizing the importance of establishing and building those long-term relationships with consumers. And we do that in a number of ways, right? But yeah, especially over the last couple of decades, I would say there has been a fundamental shift in the recognition within the discipline of marketing of the importance associated with relationships and building these win-win kind of arrangements, right, between the firm and the consumer. So this is key. So therefore, like I said, what do we want to talk about? We want to talk about sales promotion. Now, importantly, before we talk about sales promotion in detail, I want to sort of review some very important topic areas in marketing. We've spoken about them a little bit in the past, but here I want to take a little bit of a detailed examination of some of these concepts because they really relate to sales promotion, and they relate importantly to customer relationship management and relationships overall. So I want to talk about these key things. And the key things that I want to talk about fundamentally are loyalty and commitment. So what is loyalty really? What does it mean? What brands, what products are you, loyal to? What organizations are you loyal to? So these are important issues, right? So we want to talk about that. So starting off then with that very important notion, loyalty. First thing we want to ask ourselves is really, what is it? And the way that I like to think of it really comes to us from a very major researcher named Oliver, who in the 1980s, 90s did a lot of work in loyalty, commitment, satisfaction. He did a tremendous amount of seminal work in those domains. So I like his approach, and it's that approach that I want to sort of articulate for you. So when we talk about loyalty, really we're talking about that deeply held commitment to rebuy a preferred product consistently into the future. And that is sort of Oliver's approach to loyalty, a deeply held commitment to engage in that rebuying behavior into the future, right? Deeply held commitment to rebuy a preferred product consistently into the future. That's what loyalty is all about. So, when we deconstruct it, then we have that long-term kind of feeling here, right? That long-term approach into the future, that consistent repurchase behavior of a product or brand into the future, right? That's basically what loyalty is all about. So again, to emphasize. What are we saying here? It's about that same brand purchasing, right? Loyalty causes same brand, repeat same brand purchasing, right? And that happens, interestingly, despite many situational influences and marketing efforts that are really designed to try to cause switching behavior, right? We see that all the time. And so, really, then it's about the consumer's reliance, if you will, on a particular brand or product, even when there are numerous potentially equally satisfying alternatives out there in the marketplace. So really then that's what we're talking about when we talk about that interesting concept that we call loyalty. Now, as we dig into loyalty in a little bit more detail here from a consumer behavior perspective, we realize that generally there are about three major ways by which we can understand loyalty, sort of model loyalty, aspects associated with loyalty, if you will, ways of looking at loyalty, right? So three major kinds of models, if you will, by which we can have a look at it. The first one is what we call more behavioral loyalty. Behavioral loyalty. And here, this is simply loyalty, as I've just described it, that's expressed in terms of behavior, that's expressed in terms of purchasing, essentially, which is, I would argue, embedded in the definition of it, really. The second major model that we can look at is more of an attitudinal aspect, attitudinal loyalty. Now, you remember what attitude is, eh? And we've spoken about this numerous times before in the course. When we talk about attitude, attitude is that learned predisposition to respond positively or negatively to an object, essentially. So that's what attitude is. So attitudinal loyalty, it's all about looking at attitude and understanding, modeling loyalty as an attitude that can sometimes certainly lead to an ongoing relationship with a brand, right? So loyalty as a behavior, loyalty as an attitude, another way. And then there's a third way that we can model loyalty, and that, interestingly, is what we call co-determinants of choice. That's the third way that we can look at it, co-determinants of choice. And here, when we're talking about co-determinants of choice, we're talking about how different things, different concepts, constructs, if you will, can impact that loyalty, can impact the effect of loyalty on likelihood of purchase, in other words. So if you think of a very simple model, A leading to B, loyalty resulting in likelihood of purchase. Okay, loyalty resulting in likelihood of purchase. We have that. Well, impacting that relationship, we have a bunch of things, right, that we can look at, these co-determinants, such as consumer novelty seeking. Some consumers, they love seeking out novel situations, novel products, novelty, and that's a construct, right? We can measure that. I've measured that before in some of my research, by the way. So we can measure that novelty seeking. Innovativeness. Some consumers, they seek those innovative kind of products. Variety seeking behavior, all those kind of things, right? Does that affect loyalty, that consistent repurchase behavior going into the future? Yeah, of course it does, right? So that is, internal to the consumer, that can affect that loyalty. So in other words, these co-determinants then, as we say, moderate the effect of loyalty on likelihood of purchase. And so that's sort of the third way that we can look at it. So there's sort of that interaction effect between loyalty, if you will, and those co-determinants as it relates to the likelihood of purchase moving forward. So three major ways by which we can model loyalty. Now, Sudipta, did you have a question?
Yes, Professor, I do had a question. Professor, I think product designs can also create loyalty, right? Just like Apple, they created a ecosystem, and like I recently bought an iPhone, and I actually got a Apple AirPods Pro for that because I couldn't, like it's other headphones are not comparable about that. So that, like, I am into Apples now, and does it goes into the code determines loyalty, the last code determinants.
Yeah, I would think so.
Okay,
Sure.
okay, Professor. Perfect. Thank
Yeah.
you.
So we have loyalty. Now, embedded in loyalty is this notion of commitment, right? Which is another important word here, right? That's another information packed kind of word here, commitment. So when we talk about commitment, what is commitment really? You know, well, commitment is certainly part of a long term relationship, right? Certainly it's related to loyalty because it's embedded in the approach and the definition that I offered you to start with. So when we talk about commitment, then we're really thinking about the kind of a long lasting intention to build and maintain a long term relationship. So that's what commitment is all about. Just like when two people get married, for example, right? They express and they engage in a commitment to each other, that in long lasting intention to build and maintain that long term relationship. That's what commitment is all about. And when we look at commitment, we see that it has some various, constituent components, right? We recognize that there's an affective aspect to it. In other words, affect, which is more emotionally based, certainly, that positive attitude kind of aspect to it. We recognize that there's also, more of an instrumental component. In other words, an investment of time or something is made with a view to getting something else out of it, right? That's what we mean by instrumental. You put something in order to get something out of it, right? So certainly there's that instrumental aspect associated with commitment. And lastly, we have sort of the temporal aspect, which means that it occurs over time. So those are key aspects then associated with that very important feature, commitment, which is embedded in that approach to loyalty, as we've just discussed. So these are very important notions that should be very clear in your mind. And these are sort of foundational kinds of concepts here that we need to sort of recognize here as we build our thorough understanding of sales promotion and CRM at the back end. So, recognizing that, then we can talk about sales promotion. Sales promotion. So, really, what is sales promotion? Well, fundamentally, when we talk about sales promotion, you can think of it as being something that is intended and designed to try to get customers to take action. That's what it is. It's a call to action. Sales promotion is a call to action. We want the customer to do something, preferably purchase, right? That's what we want to do here. That's what it's all about. It's about trying to stimulate that kind of a behavioral outcome. Essentially, that's what it is. So it's an action focused marketing event whose purpose really then is to have a direct impact on the behavior of the firm's customers. That's what sales promotion is all about. So yeah, absolutely action focused. It has that direct intended impact on behavior, which is typically purchase. And yes, it absolutely influences customers. So typically then we see it as based on time to a large extent. It has a definite beginning, it has a definite end usually. And so those are some key features associated with what we call sales promotion. Furthermore, we see that there are fundamentally three major types of sales promotion here, right? We see that there are consumer promotions, trade promos, and retailer promos, right? Three major types, right? So those are important aspects to recognize here, and we'll be having a look at each one of them. So like I said, it really works directly with the behavioral aspect of customers in order to really try to, stimulate and influence that purchase, if you will. Again, I'll say it again, like for the third time, it's very, very important that you realize that it lasts a specific time. Okay, so that is key. Kazim, your hand is up.
Sorry, Professor. What are the types again? The types, the three types.
Those are the three types right there.
Awesome. Thank you, sir.
Okay, so we have consumer, trade, and retailer. So let's have a look at each one of these in a little bit more detail here. First of all, when we look at consumer promotions here, fundamentally, what are we talking about? We're talking about those kinds of sales promotions that are directly from the manufacturer aimed at the consumer. They're aimed at the consumer. Okay, so that's the key thing to recognize here. Furthermore, we realize that, and again, we're looking at some low-end technical aspects here. There's some broad categories of consumer-oriented sales promos here. We have some that are based on price, others based more on product. We have some premiums, and we have some contests, games, sweepstakes. So those are some of the broad categories here that we have. So first of all, we can have a look at price-based kinds of sales promos, and there are a whole lot of things here that reside under that price-based kind of approach here. Fundamentally, when we're talking about price-based, what do you think we're talking about? We're talking about reducing the price. So it's all about reducing the price, right? And we realize that that stimulates action, right? From our entire previous two sessions, right? Basic economic theory of supply and demand. You reduce the price, what will it do? Generally, it will stimulate quantity demanded, right? We know that. So price-based sales promo, we're talking about discounts essentially. So recognizing that, then we can say, okay, well, that's all kind of cool. What about it? Well, we realize that these discounts that we're talking about, certainly it's a way of trying to motivate consumers to buy particular brands, right? So we realize that. We realize then that whenever we drop the price, what is the most important thing that we are concerned about here? Whenever we tinker with price in such a way as I am talking about now, what do we have to be careful about? What is our key concern here? What do we always want to consider? Come on, guys. Yes, Ying. Yes, the brand. We always want to consider the price. We never want to do anything to price without first considering that very important aspect, the brand. And specifically here, then, we are concerned, right? I mean, if we drop the price, we always have to think what will be the effect on the brand and brand equity, right? So if we drop the price here, which is what we're talking about, will it dilute brand equity, so to speak? So we need to be very cognizant of that. Furthermore, whenever we're talking about price drops, like we are now, we're always concerned about potential expectations of the consumer. What role would that price drop have on the consumer? Will it sort of lead the consumer to become more price sensitive? In other words, if they start to expect discounts, maybe they'll become more price sensitive. Yeah. So expectations are very important. It might cause consumers to wait for a price discount that they anticipate, that they expect before making a purchase, right? For example, I mean, just look at the periodic discounts that Canadian Tire has all the time. I mean, I like, working with my hands, and I like building things and fixing things and tools. I love tools. So, before I make a purchase at Canadian Tire at full price for a particular tool, for example, I will likely try to wait, because I know that generally speaking, those items will rotate through some kind of a price discount, right? Why? Expectations. Um, Furthermore, related to that, I mean, very often what will happen too is that I will uh, purchase a tool that is being discounted because I expect that in the future I might use it. So that's happened to me lots of times. So I might use it in the future. So therefore, I'm going to take advantage of it and buy it right now at a 60 or 70% discount, right? It's all about consumer expectations. I've mentioned to you before, many consumers will wait until the fall time frame before making a major auto purchase, because that generally is the time, I'm talking more pre-COVID now, but that generally is the time that the major auto manufacturers introduce their sales promo of finance rates, eh? Which we'll talk about in a minute too. So those are other things. So all these price-based kinds of aspects are very, very important. So we always need to ask, though, when we talk about price-based kinds of aspects and sales price and price discounting, we always have to ask ourselves, what will be the long-term effect of that price drop or that price discount, right? So we always have to be cognizant of that. Another important consideration that resides under that price-based category are couponing programs. Yeah, and we've spoken about couponing programs numerous times in the course so far. Very often, not always, certainly, because there are some electronically based coupons, but very often the coupons that we see generally in the marketplace are disseminated on paper, and very often they're distributed through what we call freestanding inserts, right? FSIs, freestanding inserts, in a penny saver magazine or a newspaper or in a magazine or in your mailbox or whatever, right? So we have these generally paper-based kinds of couponing programs. So couponing, very prominent, right? Happens a lot. And it has some key advantages and disadvantages also, by the way. What are some of the advantages? Well, certainly we can preempt the competition by dropping the price via a couponing program. So that's useful from a strategic perspective, we can preempt the competition. We can essentially engage in price discrimination, by using couponing. What do I mean by that? Well, you remember when we talk about price discrimination, what is that all about? It's all about charging different prices to different consumers for essentially the same product, right? That's what price discrimination is all about. So here, for example, using coupons, you know what? We can charge different prices to different consumers based on their price sensitivities. In other words, we can charge essentially full price, uncouponed prices, full prices, to those consumers who are price insensitive. They're not price sensitive at all. They don't care about coupons. They don't care about it. So we can charge more to those consumers. Conversely, with coupons, we can charge less to those consumers who are price sensitive, because those consumers will take advantage of the coupons, right? Like me. They'll take advantage of it, right? So we can use couponing in that regard to practice price discrimination, so to speak. Another key advantage of a couponing program is something that I have spoken about several times in the course so far. Most lately, I talked about it when we talked about penetration pricing. Remember I said penetration pricing, that tactic, pricing low, I said it limits potential flexibility. How? Because it's very hard to raise the price after we price low. And at that time I said, and I'll say it again now, that we can cushion a potential price increase by using a couponing program. So it can be very useful and advantageous from that perspective. We can also use it to reach appropriate, consumer target groups and that kind of a thing, right? There are some drawbacks though with couponing programs, right? They really can't be used to gain a sustained long-term competitive advantage from a strategic perspective because, of course, it's a sales promo and accordingly there's a definite beginning and a definite end to it. So you can't really develop a competitive advantage with it per se. We also realize that response rates are typically quite low in most couponing programs. In fact, if you have a response rate of about 10% or so, that's considered generally quite high, actually. So, yeah, redemption rates are typically low, and importantly, couponing programs are quite expensive. So, therefore, the cost per redemption is quite expensive. So, yeah, make no mistake, it costs a lot of money then to, print them, disseminate them, use them, serialize numbers on them, engage the retailer in redemption and then all the process associated with that. So it's an expensive kind of an endeavor, really. So, like I said, that is something to consider. Furthermore, we also want to consider that couponing programs, there is potential for fraud also. So some bad people can do some bad things with regard to coupons and couponing programs. So those are some key things then that we want to recognize, when we talk about couponing programs. So we also see that there are a bunch of other kind of aspects then that reside under this price-based umbrella here. In addition to sales price and in addition to coupons, we also have rebates. What about rebates and refunds like that, right? Now, we spoke at length last class about rebates when we talked about an extension of prospect theory into mental accounting, mental arithmetic, the work of Richard Thaler, for example. And we looked at various combinations of gains and losses, remember? And it was at that time that I spent a fair amount of time explaining to you the psychological basis behind and the power behind really rebates and rebate programs. So yeah, rebates are another kind of a price-based effort, right? We also have financing terms, right? As I mentioned a few minutes ago, auto retailers and other fairly major kind of producers, they will introduce financing terms in order to try to stimulate purchasing, right? So we have financing terms. What about frequent users, right? Loyalty programs. We'll talk more about loyalty programs later. But frequent users and rewards that come from frequent users, in terms of price reductions, another aspect. So yeah, price-based kinds of consumer sales promos, quite extensive. There are quite a few. We also have more product-based approaches here, and here we're talking about things like bonus packs and samples and that kind of a thing. So we're talking about giveaways. You open up your mailbox and you see a little box of laundry detergent, or you go into a Costco and you sample a piece of pizza, or you find a new type of a razor that's being introduced into the marketplace in your mailbox. Those kinds of samples and giveaways, for example, right? So when is that typically used? Typically during product introductory stages, or the product introductory stage, I should say. So that helps to generate and build awareness, try to stimulate trial and that kind of a thing. And so, yeah, we see how that can be distributed, through the mail or, in a store. So we have these kinds of product-based kind of approaches at play. Of course, some of the major problems associated with it are the cost. These are very expensive endeavors, right? Because you're giving away product for free, basically. Also, it's hard to target particular consumers, hard to target a particular market or a segment per se for all of the reasons that I just mentioned. So you have these kind of problems associated with that. Premiums, that's another way. What is a premium? Essentially, a premium is something that's given with a purchase. So something simple might be, a movie ticket, a movie pass, or something in a box of cereal, or a figurine in a box of cereal, or a toy in a box of cereal. It seems like cereals tend to do that a lot. Your Happy Meal, right? At McDonald's, has a toy for kids, you know. So yeah, Kellogg's used to do it years ago, yeah. So it's premium. It's a giveaway at the time of purchase, right? So you have premiums. And then of course we have contests, sweepstakes, and that kind of a thing. Yeah, Kinder, yeah, exactly. Kinder does it. So we have those kind of things. So sweepstakes, games, and that kind of a thing. Roll up the rim, Tim Hortons, really. That's a type of a contest, if you will. So we have these kind of efforts at play. So that is key. So consumer, we also have, like I said, more trade-oriented sales promos. And again, remember here, we're talking more B2B. Okay, so think channels of distribution here. We're thinking B2B here. And so fundamentally, when we talk about trade promos per se, what are we talking about? The focus here is all about trying to, provide the retailers with incentives to carry the product, essentially. So it's often used when manufacturers want retailers to pass on those savings to buyers, right? So you want to load up your channel members with product, essentially. That's what you're trying to do here with various trade promotions here. Primarily, we're again talking about price-based, product-based, and place-based kinds of endeavors here, primarily. So yeah, we have that going on. So price-based, essentially we're talking about different types of buying allowances. You buy a certain bulk and you can get a discount, so to speak. Financing terms, those kind of things, right, that can be used. Product-based, you can include free goods, giveaways, that kind of a thing. You could have very liberal consignment policies and return policies. So one channel member or retailer, for example, that has unsold inventory, return it to the manufacturer, for example. That's a product-based kind of trade promo. We have also place-based kinds of trade promos. And these are very interesting here when we're talking about place-based. Here we're talking about different types of what we call slotting fees or display fees or slotting allowances. And as I think I might have told you in the past, when we look at particular industries, especially the grocery industry, you have to remember when we're talking about major grocery stores and grocery chains, there are a lot of manufacturers, a lot of products, yeah? So space then becomes a premium. And so space, the real estate, if you will, within the grocery store is a very, very scarce commodity. And so since it's so scarce, grocery chains then can charge manufacturers to carry their products. And that charge, if you will, is what we call slotting fees or slotting allowances. So those can be used, raised, lowered, or whatever, right? That can form a type of a trade promo. So yeah, and these can be very expensive. Eh? Like if you're a major ice cream producer, for example, and you want to get your ice cream into nationwide Loblaws or Real Canadian Superstores, I mean, it could cost upwards of, two, three, $400,000 a year. Just pay them to carry your product. So it can be very, very expensive depending on a whole bunch of items. Some retailers and grocery outlets refuse to get involved in that. Walmart, to my knowledge, does not. Costco does not. So some of the major ones do not, but many of the pure retail grocery stores absolutely do. So it's an interesting kind of a thing. So we have those place-based kinds of promos. And also another type of a place-based promo is like warehousing and delivery assistance. So the manufacturer, the wholesaler, then would deliver the product to the retailer, and not only will they deliver it, but sometimes they will even unload it and go in and put it on the shelves for the retailer. Yeah. So that's another type of a promotional effort, right? We also have advertisements and promotional based kinds of efforts. Here you might see something like cost splitting between, the producer and the retailer, for example. So advertisement, promotional cost splitting there. There are different types of selling aids also that can be used here too. For example, manufacturers could use what they call a shelf talker, and that's where you have an apparatus, say some kind of a little monitor, for example, that plays little videos on a loop on how to use a particular tool or part or knife sharpening device or something like that, right? So you have these kind of things, that shelf talker that describes things to consumers. So, we have those kind of things at play also. So yeah, both kinds of selling aids, and we have different types of cooperative selling in place and that kind of a thing. We have sales-based kinds of approaches here. We have, different types of bonuses and incentives that can be offered to, retailers based on their sales from the manufacturers. The auto industry is famous for that, right? Providing bonuses and incentives to their dealers for selling cars. And it's such a shady business in many respects that, a lot of these little kickbacks and these little bonuses that accrue to car dealerships are basically invisible to the general consuming public, you know. But if they meet a particular quota, a dealership might get, either a cash or some kind of a credit back from the manufacturer, or they could get a subsequent discount on future orders that they might ensue. And, so it's a whole thing, right? It's all hidden, deliberately hidden, I would argue, in the auto industry. So it gets pretty complicated. Yeah, and other sales-based, different types of contests and prizes. I told you about my friend Rob, right? The car salesman. Rob, who has won all kinds of contests from GM for selling cars, you know, trip for two to Vegas, iPads, those kind of things, right? He's won those sales-based kinds of contests. So yeah, so trade promotions, right? Alive and well, a lot of things going on there. Also, the third major type of sales promotion that we want to consider are sort of at the retail level here when we talk about retailer promotions, right? So what are we talking about here when we talk about retailer promotions? Retailer promotions. Well, basically, it's all about trying to stimulate that retail sales, right? So the focus here then is on the retailer more so than the product or the brand. So when I get, an e-coupon or some kind of a emailed promotion for Lowe's that they're offering 20% discount for one day, what is that? It's all about a sales promo based on price to try to bring the consumer into Lowe's to make purchases in Lowe's. So that fundamentally is what we're talking about here. Furthermore, when we talk about retailer promos, retailers can use a bunch of tools to try to facilitate that, right? They can use what we call end of aisle displays, otherwise known as end caps, you know. And what does that do? That sort of increases the likelihood of purchase because it makes those products that occupy that end of aisle display or those end caps, it makes it more salient in the mind of the consumer, it draws their attention to it. We have displays at the front of the store, again, drawing the consumer's attention to it. We have those specific displays, point of purchase displays. We have those in aisle standing displays. We see that quite a bit, especially in the hardware industry. We see that all the time at Home Depot, at Lowe's, Canadian Tire, especially Home Depot and Lowe's, typically that have that big footprint, standalone displays in the aisles. Again, all with a view to trying to draw the consumer's attention to those products. And again, like I said, we have shelf talkers also that are used quite extensively to provide additional information on products. So yeah, we have a lot of these kind of things going on. But like I said, I mean, when we talk about those retailer sales promos, it's about those coupons or price promos, really that encourages more store purchasing, more so than particular brand kind of purchasing. We also recognize that a lot of retailers are very active in their loyalty programs, right? So loyalty programs are exceptionally frequent in retail, and so they're heavily used, yeah. But there are some key problems associated with loyalty programs, right, that we should be aware of. If we're going to talk about retail loyalty programs, we should be aware of some key aspects associated with loyalty programs, by the way. One of the major problems I would suggest with loyalty programs are that the hurdles that are put into place by which consumers can redeem their points or redeem rewards are often too high, right? So, you have to use air miles, you might have to attain, tens of thousands before you can reap any kind of a reward with air miles or points or something like that. Yeah. And we see that very often, right? So then the consumer looks at it and says, why bother? I mean, it's ridiculous. I can't, I'll never attain those kind of points. And then they don't even bother. And so it defies the whole purpose, right? So the point here then is that if you're going to design a loyalty program, you have to ensure then that the hurdles, the levels by which consumers can be rewarded are realistic. Okay, so that's a key thing. Don't make the hurdles too high, right? We also realize, importantly, that it's important to communicate the loyalty program to consumers, to explain it to them, to make it easy for them to use and to understand. They have to understand the nuances associated with a loyalty program, right? So that is very often neglected. Sometimes it's too confusing for consumers to understand the nuances associated with it, right? So that has to be very carefully and deliberately communicated to consumers. Furthermore, related to that is, like I said, ease of use. Yeah, you want a loyalty program that is easy to use. Very often in the past, you would have these clunky loyalty cards, for example. Yeah. So that, you'd have to lug around, or consumers would have to lug around these stupid cards in their wallets all the time. And so whenever you make a purchase, you have to hope that you have the card with you to start with, and bring out the card and get it punched or put the sticker on it or whatever, right? So that's often a bit of a nuisance, not very convenient, right, for consumers. And then, of course, if you look at the flip side, if you look at electronically based kinds of, loyalty programs that is held online or in a database, then it raises issues with respect to privacy issues and ethical concerns associated with that, right? So those are key concerns that you have to think about, right? And then in turn, how to analyze the data that you get. In other words, how do you mine the data from the data warehouse, right? A pervasive question. We also see, with respect to loyalty programs, I would argue that now the market is saturated with these loyalty programs. So it seems like there are way too many competing loyalty programs out there. It seems like everybody has their own loyalty program. And interestingly, we see how some retailers have taken measures to sort of amalgamate some of it, right? PC points comes to mind, right? PC points with shoppers points and those kind of things, right? That have sort of made a concerted effort to amalgamate some of those loyalty points, so to speak. So yeah, there are way too many plans out there, so to speak. At the end of the day, though, from a strategic perspective, we have to realize that the loyalty program has to be in sync with and complementary of the overall value proposition that the retailer is offering. So, what is the value proposition? It's that promise that the retailer makes to the consumer. So the loyalty program has to flow out of that. It has to be in sync with that, And lastly, I would suggest that the loyalty program also has to, complement the brand. We have to recognize that, through a loyalty program, we don't want to inadvertently have any kind of a detrimental effect on brand equity, right? Either. So we have to consider what will be the effect of a loyalty program, which might have embedded into it a price reduction or something or whatever, but we have to consider what will be the effect on brand and specifically brand equity, right? So these are some key concerns that you need to be aware of with respect to loyalty programs. And the last major category here for other promos we want to think about are like the point of purchase kind of advertising and displays and that kind of a thing that occurs, right? As I just mentioned before. So, point of purchase, I mean, they're especially important because, as I will again repeat momentarily, but we realize that, the point of purchase displays and products that are offered at the point of purchase, the consumer is standing there waiting in line, they're looking around, and they say, oh yeah, I think I'll grab that Excel package of cough drops. You remember that? Or gum or whatever, and put it in my basket and buy it, right? So typically we see those point of purchase kind of, purchases occurring that are typically products of low involvement kinds of products. And they're especially important because in retail, the majority of purchases, in fact, are pure impulse purchases, meaning that most purchases actually are unplanned, unscheduled, unpre-thought, so to speak. So there's no forethought that goes into most of the purchases. People go into the retail outlet, the grocery store, or whatever, and they see something and say, oh, yeah, okay, I see that. Oh, yeah, maybe I'll buy that. Boom, put it in the basket, yeah? We see that upwards of 75%, in fact, of retail purchases are precisely that, just impulse buys. So, point of purchase kind of displays facilitates that somewhat. So yeah, we have all of these things going on here when we talk about sales promotion. So there's a lot of different types of sales promotions, right? A lot of shapes and sizes and types and permutations and all that kind of thing that go on here, all with a view to trying to stimulate some kind of an action here, right? Sales promotion, very, very important. And of course, we see these three types. So now that we have spoken for almost an hour on, low level kind of who's and what's and how's and, what's, that kind of a thing. We've spoken about a variety of shapes and sizes and types here. Let's importantly elevate our thinking a little bit and start thinking more, as we should be, more strategically, and consider some key strategic aspects, objectives. What are the objectives? What are we trying to do? How to evaluate and that kind of a thing. So that is what we want to do now as we consider strategic aspects associated with each of these three major domains of sales promo. So starting off, then again, let's start off again talking about the consumer side of it. And so strategically, when we talk about the consumer-oriented sales promo, fundamentally, we need to consider a key aspect. Where are we in the product lifecycle, right? So specifically, sales promos become particularly important at the introductory stage, right? Where we're trying to build awareness at product introduction. We're trying to stimulate trials, So these things are particularly useful at that introductory stage. We also realize, though, that it's still very important for more established products also, right? At the back end of a growth aspect or into the mature stage, it's also very important for those established products, yeah? We may want to establish a sales boost, for example, right? So it will typically result in a temporary sales boost. And that is something that we may want to do, right? If we want to clear out inventory or whatever, we may want to do that, right? And we've spoken in the past in the course as to how we can do that, right? But we can use sales promos to do that, for example. We, of course, realize that the effect of a sales promo that we might introduce here for established products might be lost when the competition introduces their own sales promo. So when they introduce their own in-kind sales promo, the boost in sales that we're experiencing and enjoying might be curtailed, right? Again, depending on elasticities and substitutability and that kind of a thing that we talked about last class. So those are key things then that we need to realize, especially when we're talking about established products. Certainly, though, again, when we talk about consumer-oriented sales promos and price promotions especially, we realize that we need to sort of approach them with a lot of caution, right? We have to understand that very often there is a definite cost associated with these programs. And so we have to be very cognizant and think through the cost benefit analysis very, very closely. Like I said, couponing programs, for example, very expensive, right? So we need to think through that cost benefit. Trials, sampling, right? Very expensive. So we need to think through that very, very closely and engage in detailed analysis before we launch on something like that. So really then when we look at different types of objectives, again, on the consumer side, we recognize some key ways by which we can look at, major objectives. For current consumers, what do we seek to do then? What's our objective for current consumers? Well, for our current consumers, what do we want to do? We want to try to get them to buy. We want to get them to buy more and be loyal and buy now. So buy more of our brand and buy now. That's what we want to do, Sales promo can help us do that, in accordance with the way that we're talking about it. How about brand switchers? For those potential brand switchers, right? What do we want to do? We want to try to capture their next purchase, right? We can do that through sales promos. How about non-customers? In other words, the competitors' customers, we might want to tap into them. What do we want to do here then? From an objective perspective, we want to try to get them to try our product. Sales promos, as we've discussed, can help us do that, right? In other words, we want to try to get into their consideration set, get them to try it, fall in love, and be loyal to us, right? That's what we want. And also, what do we want to do if we want to try to build relationships, relationship building, right? We want to generate that awareness, and importantly, we want to reinforce that image. And sales promos can help us do that. Again, key objectives here that we might want to do for each one of those circumstances. So recognizing objectives then, as I've said before, in marketing, if we do it, if it's worth doing, it's worth measuring. We always want to think about measurement in marketing, right? Is it working? We always want to think about measurement. And certainly this is no exception. So how do we think about measurement then? How do we measure the effectiveness of our sales promo? Well, it gets back to assessing our objectives. Our measures have to be focused on the objectives that we happen to be seeking. So that's key. We might want to, again, develop those measures that are consistent with the objectives. It could be something like incremental sales. We want to perhaps track before promo and after promo sales. We want to track sales during the sales promo, right? So these are key things that we want to think about. So if we were to sort of sketch that out a little bit, it would look something like this. I mean, we have sales and we have sales over time. And so in this fictitious example, we have our baseline sales that are puttering along, which is all very nice. So at about the point A here in that triangle at the start of it, probably, we introduce a sales promo, and that has resulted in a spike in sales. So that spike of sales increases. Consumers then will build up, they'll purchase more and more. And, once their inventories become replenished, their personal inventories become replenished, it'll start to taper off and the sales promo will typically end, right? Start, end time. And then we have an interesting effect that occurs. We have a dip in sales below our baseline levels. So what is happening here at the B level? Well, what we have here is that consumers, after having purchased and taken advantage of sales promos, during time A, what we see then is that we see a dip below baseline levels as they use and expend the personal or household inventories that they have built up, right? And we see that a lot. I mean, I have about 4 or 5 bottles of Frank's Red hot sauce here in my house that I have purchased, right? So I'm going to go through all those before I start buying more, so to speak, right? So we have then at the B level, we have consumers that are just expending their personal inventories before they they start buying more again, and then you get back into that sort of baseline notion again. So it's interesting to see that. So we always want to think about a potential dip in sales following a sales promo for reasons that I just mentioned. So it's key to track these before, during, and after sales like this and recognize that. So the question then from a strategic perspective becomes then, within a trade-oriented kind of domain here, so we're switching more into the trade B2B kind of realm here, the situation then becomes within this domain, okay, should we or should we not use some sales promos as we discussed? So what are some of the strategic considerations then that help us to understand that? And we recognize here that within this B2B context here, it's a big deal, right? Because I mean, it's a huge part. It's often the largest part, sales promo, largest part of an ad promo budget here. So it's a fairly pricey thing here. So we want to very carefully consider then, from a strategic perspective, should we or should we not engage in it? So to help us understand that, then we can introduce some key considerations here. One is what we call holding costs. And what are holding costs? Holding costs are precisely as the word describes. How much does it cost to hold the inventory? And, you can quite easily recognize that, those items that are highly perishable, that are time sensitive, that expire at a particular time, food items, for example, fresh vegetables, frozen foods, the holding costs associated with these products are very, very high. It costs a lot of money to keep massive warehouses refrigerated for frozen foods, for example. It's a lot of effort to handle flowers, fresh flowers, and fresh fruits and vegetables. Yeah, so the holding costs are very high for those, as compared to, say, something like some hardware items, like nuts and bolts, screws, nails, that kind of a thing, right? Holding costs very low for these kind of things, right? They never go bad. So holding costs, that's a key consideration. We also consider this notion of elasticity here in this context. Here we're talking about promotional elasticity. So by way of review, you'll remember last class we talked a lot about price elasticity of demand, whereby we sort of looked at it and we said, okay, well, if we change the price a little bit or a lot, what effect will it have on quantity demanded, right? Price elasticity of demand. And you'll remember when we talked about that, we talked about something like a small change in price might lead to a large change in quantity demanded. And under that circumstance, what are we talking about? We're talking about high elasticity, right? Conversely, the reverse was true, right? If we had a large change in price resulting in a comparatively small change in quantity demanded, that's what we call inelasticity or low elasticity, right? We talked about that. Well, the analogous situation is true for promotional elasticity here. So when we talk about promotional elasticity, we're basically, again, conceptually looking at, what will be the change or the resultant effect on quantities sold in response to a promotional effort. Again, we're talking conceptually here. So will a small or a small promotional effort then, relatively small promotional effort, result or produce in a comparatively large quantity sold? Or conversely, will a large promotional effort result in a comparatively small quantity sold, right? So we look at this elasticity in that case. So therefore, recognizing that, we can combine these two variables and say, okay, well, looking at these and thinking through these helps us to determine whether or not we should pursue with some kind of a trade-oriented sales promo. So if we look at a situation where we have high holding costs and high promotional elasticity situation, well, under those circumstances, you know what? Yeah, therefore, we should probably use some sales promos here, right? Conversely, if we have a situation where we have low holding costs and low promotional elasticity, well, under that circumstance, there's no real incentive for manufacturers to use trade-oriented sales promos. So therefore, yeah, maybe not, you know? So that is the kind of strategic thinking then that we want to bring to bear as we think through whether or not we should, at the trade level here, B2B level, engage in various promotional efforts, right? So yeah, when we look at some of the, again, trade-oriented promos and some of the key objectives that we might pursue, you know, it could be along the lines to induce retailers to do several things, you know, possibly to offer a price discount. In other words, to, as we call it, pass through some kind of a price discount to consumers. We might want to do that. Offer retailers a price discount with a view to enabling them to pass that through to consumers and in turn enhance quantity demanded. So yeah, you know, we could induce retailers to do that, offer a price discount. We could offer a sales promo to try to get them to display the brand or advertise the brand. Yeah, so we can induce retailers to do those things. Those might be some key objectives, right? We might want to gain or maintain even distribution of our particular products. You know, we might want to offer incentives to the retailer or the dealer's sales force in order to push the brand, right? Like GM does for its dealerships, for example. Yeah. And the sales force at the dealerships. So we have that kind of a thing, right? We may want to really, in a more deliberate way, load up our channel members with inventory, you know? At the end of the day, though, we need to be cautious, though, because we want to avoid a long-term or a permanent price reduction, right? So we always want to be cognizant of that. So therefore, at the trade level, then, how do we evaluate it? Well, again, we could engage in that baseline kind of sales analysis before, during, and after. You know, what is the baseline? How can we compare the sales promo result to the baseline? That's the kind of thinking in terms of evaluation we want to bring to bear. And also we're concerned about, you know, we're always concerned, you know, to what extent will some of the price promotions be passed through to the consumer, you know? So we want to recognize that, you know, and there have been, you know, quite a bit of, you know, research on how you know, the effects of these pass-through kinds of sales promos passed through the retailer to the consumer. So yeah, we see this kind of thing at play. And then lastly, again, at the retail side, you know, we can look at, you know, various strategic aspects as far as retail promos go. You know, the strategic aspects, the objectives, the evaluation approaches, and that kind of thing essentially are the same as other end user promotions. We see that again, retailer promos primarily focus on trying to generate purchases for the retail store primarily versus a particular brand per se. So we see that going on. We see the retailers' promo impact can have an impact on consumers in-store decisions, so to speak. And another very important aspect is the interaction effect between various sales promos. And there have been some very interesting marketing research, academic studies in this domain. And the research questions arise then, if you have a consumer-based sales promo going on, and you also have like a retail promos going on, what will be the effect on the consumer and on sales of these two sales promotional efforts? In other words, how do the two interact? And generally, the research shows us, interestingly, that there's a very positive interaction kind of an effect that takes place, whereby the resultant effect of and the synergistic effect of these two sales promotional efforts are larger than the sum of the individual effects if they were offered individually, which is a very interesting effect, when you think about it. So we have that very positive synergistic kind of an effect that takes place when we're using several of these sales promos, so to speak. So yeah, sales promos are very, very important, especially, like I said, in a retail environment where, 75% of retail purchases are really unplanned, right? In other words, they're impulse buys. So impulse buying is a very, very important feature. It's a very interesting domain also of consumer behavior, impulse buying, by the way, and impulsivity and that kind of a thing. So yeah, so we have that going on. So at this point then, how are we doing for time? 7:18. So how about you guys? So very quickly, are you guys subject, what's your general feel here? How susceptible do you feel you are to various sales promotions as consumers? What do you think? I had a very interesting discussion with my former sections, my previous sections on this domain. What do you think? Diane, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think I am very susceptible. And these sales promotions has very much huge impact with my behavior as a consumer. So of course, for those products that have very good sales promotion, I'll give you an example. Like in my country, for there's this huge department store that we call super mall. They release what they call this, a loyalty card, wherein each time you buy and swipe that card, you will earn points, and these points can be converted to cash, or you can use them to buy something again. So I'm very much engaged that I only shop in the supermarket of that particular mall, and just to use that card all the time, so I can get perks from it, so that when the points get higher, I normally can use it to buy necessary stuff. So yeah.
Where's that, in Manila?
Yeah. It's I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. The SM Super Mall, owned by Henry C. So one of the
Actually, I am not. Actually, I'd love to visit the Philippines someday, but yeah, very much. I've seen a lot of beautiful things about the Philippines, and I'd definitely like to. Some of my favorite music is from the Philippines. Actually,
really.
one of my favorite all-time singers is a lady named Lani Misalucha.
Oh yeah. Likewise, I really like her too. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, her voice is just, I mean, it's like supernatural. I mean, it's like superhuman, her music and her voice, and there's a lot of really talented musicians that come out of the Philippines, eh?
Yep. It's just pretty bad now because the current administration shut down the biggest media giant in the Philippines, and the
Oh,
majority
really?
of the singers are actually under that company. So
What company was that now?
it's ABS-CBN. It's one of the biggest in Asia, actually. So it
Oh,
was shut
really?
down by the current administration in the Philippines.
Why is that? That's interesting. Why did that happen now?
Well, I think there are a lot of political factors that interplayed with the shutdown. But it depends of how a person would look at in its own perspective. But a majority of us believe that it was shut down because of political feud and political issues.
Oh, wow.
That was the first.
Terrible.
It was actually the first time since the martial law in the Philippines.
Hmm. That's terrible.
Yeah, it is, Nash. It is
Apologies.
terrible.
Yeah, yeah,
Like
wow.
11,000 employees went out of jobs during the pandemic.
Yeah, yeah, terrible, terrible.
Yeah, yeah. It is.
Well, yeah. Well, hopefully things will correct themselves and things will
Yeah,
get.
hopefully with the elections coming in next year, hopefully,
Are
Professor.
there? Are
Yeah.
there? Yeah.
Yep.
Mhm. And what are the two major, very quickly, I don't want to run out of time here. What are the major sort of parties in the Philippines then?
Oh, yeah. For presidency now, the two opposing big parties would be, the one under the current administration, the Marcos. They're very famous. The son of Ferdinand Marcos, the ousted
It
president.
is, eh?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
really?
He's
Well,
running for
Marcus,
president.
they're still involved, eh? Marcus, holy
Yeah, I
smokes. Wow.
know. I know. I don't know. The audacity. And then the other party is the woman, Lenny Robredo, the current vice president of the Philippines. So she's running for presidency.
So is she good or bad?
Well, in in my opinion, she's really good. She doesn't have any no bad reputation, no corruption issues compared to the others. She's kind of clean, except that I think in terms of financial backups, she doesn't really have that much. So, I it's still rely. The power is still on the people. So not all people. I'm actually jealous with our other countries because in the Philippines they're not that they're not very considerate of their of the welfare of their country.
And it's kind of hard, I guess, to unseat those Marcos, eh?
Yeah.
Marcos. Yeah,
And I don't know if they're gonna be seated against like repeating the history repeating itself, I mean.
yeah, yeah. How old is this Marcos' son? How old is this guy anyway?
Probably is around over 60 or in his
Oh,
60s.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
Well,
yep.
I always remember that report that came out many, many years ago about what's her name? Mrs. Marcos. I forget her name, but all the shoes, eh?
Ferdinand,
Had, yeah, she had
Ferdinand.
like thousands of pairs of shoes, was it, or something like that?
Yeah, that's her wife, Imelda Marcos. So they were
Yeah,
ousted because of the people power revolution in the Philippines.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, good. Thanks for sharing that, Diane.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. So, okay, very good. So let's pivot here into more consumer relationship management here as we sort of enter the home stretch here for tonight's session. And so, yeah, relationship management, very important, getting even more important in marketing. We recognize that relationships, fundamental component of what marketing is all about and how, within modern marketing, we think about doing marketing. To a large extent, it's about, fostering, developing, enhancing those long-term relationships with consumers, all with a view to trying to build that win-win kind of sort of scenario here, win for the consumer, win for the firm type of thing, right? So relationships are very important indeed. Now, Let me float one thing here that I always like to float, and that is, what I call the traditional loyalty paradigm. And here we're essentially suggesting that satisfaction can drive this kind of a paradigm, whereby you see, an increase of loyalty, which results in an increase of sales, which directly results in enhanced profitability, right? So there's nothing earth shattering here. I mean, you ask, the business owners out here on the street, you ask them, does this paradigm exist? And 99.9% of them will say, yep, absolutely. Oh yeah, for sure. Definitely, definitely. And that's all well and good. And I would not dispute that. However, here, we want to look at something that is traditionally accepted like this. And here at this master's university level of thinking and education, we want to always be very critical and look at things in a very objective, critical way. And we want to say, okay, well, hold it, does that really work here, right? So we want to apply a little bit of healthy skepticism to everything here. And so we say, well, let me float this kind of a scenario. Let's say, for example, I go to a dealership and I buy a new truck. Fine. And then let's say I go back to that same dealership a period of time later and I want to buy another vehicle there. And then after a period of time, I want to buy yet another vehicle at that dealership. Well, what is happening with this consumer's expectations every time he goes to the dealership? What is happening here? Well, I'll tell you what's happening. Every time I go into that dealership, I am negotiating and I expect to get a sizable discount. That is a lower price, a sizable discount off of the MSRP in return for my continued loyalty. That's what I expect, right? That's what I want and that's what I push. That's right. In exchange for my loyalty, that's what I demand. And in actual fact, to be completely honest with you, I am very relentless when I make vehicle purchases. I am ruthless with these guys. Maybe I shouldn't be as ruthless as I am, but the way that I look at it is that, you know what, $1 in my pocket is better than $1 in, the dealership's pocket, type of thing. But at any rate, yeah, I expect to get a better and better deal each time I go in. So my expectation is that I'll get a better deal. So every time I go in here, what is happening really? What's happening in terms of their profitability? In theory, what's happening is that every time I go in, exactly, because their margins are getting smaller and smaller and smaller every time I go in. I'm the loyal guy. I keep going in, but hold it, their profitability on an individual sale is less and less and less every time I go in. And that, though, stands in contrast to, say, the disloyal guy, the guy who demonstrates no loyalty whatsoever. Joe Minivan here. Joe Minivan walks right off the street and he buys a vehicle and he pays close to MSRP here for the vehicle, right? So if you look at that snapshot between me, the loyal guy, who is demanding and getting a low price and ergo lower margin for the dealership, compare me, the loyal guy, then to Joe Minivan here, who walks off the street, pays almost full price for the vehicle. Who is more profitable? Joe Minivan, who is not loyal, walks off the street, buys it, pays full price, higher margins, greater profitability, or me, the loyal guy, who demands and gets a lower price and reduced profitability resultant for the dealership? Who is more profitable? Well, in my case that I just described to you, that loyalty then isn't really resulting in profitability for the firm. Whereas the guy who exercises no loyalty here, he's more profitable. So doesn't that then compromise this traditionally accepted paradigm? Really? What do you think? What do you think? And here again, I'm not asking you to read somebody else's notes or regurgitate what I have said in a previous class. I'm interested in your thoughts and what you think. So Mohammed, your hand is up. Go ahead.
Hello, sir. Good evening.
Hi.
So in my thoughts, like if we think about an individual case, yes, you're right. Like loyalty is not giving us uh, more profit. But if we think in a bigger perspective, this sort of products are usually high engagement products. So before you buy, you talk to people, you seek advice from the experts. So when you are becoming a loyal customer of a brand, so if someone asks about suggestion from that brand, obviously you will suggest brand. So in my opinion, in a bigger perspective, they might be giving discounts to you, and they might be there, losing some money from your purchase, but probably they are getting more from others, like when you suggest others for that brand.
Okay. Yeah. So it's sort of a scale effect kind of a thing that you're suggesting, which is a very valid point to raise. Yeah. Good thinking.
So
Good thinking.
probably this can be taken as a small investment for a bigger sale or more sales, like promotional.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. I would not disagree with that very good point that you raise, Mohammed. Good thinking. Um, but, when we look at this kind of a traditional paradigm, and we ask ourselves, is it really true? Well, I floated two scenarios here, really, or I have floated the scenario whereby it really might not be true. However, when you look at it this way, we can look at this kind of a thing and other kinds of dilemmas through the lens of a long-term approach versus a short-term approach. So if you look at the short-term kind of an approach to this and ask ourselves, is it valid in a short-term kind of an approach? The answer is no, not really, for the reasons that I just described. In a short-term snapshot kind of a thing, I've already described a scenario where the loyal guy is less profitable than the unloyal guy, who is more profitable in a snapshot, one-off, short-term kind of a perspective. However, and here's the thing, if we look at this from a long-term perspective, long-term relationships, all that kind of stuff, if we look at it from a long-term perspective, in fact, we see that loyalty and that continued sales, in fact, over the long term, yes, this does hold over the long term with these loyal consumers. And the reason why largely is because of what we call lifetime customer value. So when we look at it again, long term, we introduce this notion that we call lifetime customer value, which really is all about lifetime customer value, captures this notion of the revenue that will accrue to the firm over the course of a lifetime, over the course of a consumer's lifetime. Under that scenario, yes, this is quite true. So short term, not so much. Long term, yes, absolutely. The reason why, lifetime customer value. So um, there's something I was going to say and I forgot now. Hmm. Something popped into my head and it popped out again. I hate it when that happens. Um, anyways, yeah. So is it true? Yes, it is. Oh, yes, this is what I wanted to tell you. There's a flaw in my argument here. Okay, I've just explained why, short-term, long-term, why it's true for long-term and not true for short-term. There's a flaw in that argument, right? It's a soft point in the argument. And the flaw and the fallacy in the argument that I just raised is this. By definition, if we consider loyalty, loyalty by definition is long-term. Loyalty is long-term, that commitment, right? We talked about at the front end of our session this evening. By definition, it is long-term. So therefore, you can't really consider it and set up an argument based on short-term because it defies the very nature. That's right, Nazia. It defies the very nature of the paradigm that we're talking about here, eh? So in actual fact, my argument really collapses because it isn't really a sound, uh, philosophically based, robust, logical argument, right? Because that founding assumption collapses. And if that founding assumption collapses, everything else collapses also. Again, under that short-term scenario. But setting that aside, you get my point, right? My point here is that we want to look at things critically. And if we do look at it in a snapshot kind of a way, as I described it, not so profitable, but yes, absolutely long-term, quite valid, generally speaking. So yes, this notion then of lifetime customer value is very, very important. I've described to you what it is. And by the way, when we want to calculate it, if in fact we wanted to calculate it, simply what it is a net present value calculation, whereby we take that entire stream of revenue, ram it back in time, discount it, and there we have our net present value, and that's the calculation. That's the amount for the lifetime of the consumer. So customer retention then is very important. The key thing to remember here is that, and this is a thing that many businesses miss, when you lose a customer, not only do you lose that particular sale and transaction, but you also lose all of those future, that you lose that future stream of revenue also that originates from that customer. So that's a key consideration too. A lot of businesses, they forget about that. So it's a key thing. So again, retention, customer retention is key. And we recognize that those customers that are loyal, they are more profitable, largely because of, we've all heard about it, the 80-20 rule, the whole notion that 80% of a firm's revenue is accrued from 20% of the customer base. So, you have few people spending a lot kind of thing going on. So those few people are the die-hard loyalists. So they are very, very profitable. So we need to recognize that. So yeah, things like satisfaction, loyalty, critically important. So we need to understand, yes, absolutely. Right, yes. I just saw those last couple of comments. Yes, absolutely. So, we have different buyers that we need to be sensitive to and realize. There are those buyers that are purely transactional buyers, right? They are not interested in engaging in any kind of a relationship at all. All they want to do is to go into the restaurant, buy the meal, eat it, walk out. That's it. Highly, highly transactional buyers. Conversely, we have those that are more relationship oriented, right? These consumers that want to realize the benefits of engaging in a relationship with a business. Yeah. So we realize that generally it is important to sort of recognize these types of consumers and especially design programs that enable us to foster those relationships, especially for those relationship-oriented consumers. Hence the importance of customer relationship management. And so to do that, then, there are different ways that we can do it. There's a sort of a generic kind of a template that we can use here that you see here, right? We develop some kind of a a database on consumers. We analyze it. We determine, you know, we understand the consumers, determine who we want to target, engage in, you know, efforts to build the relationship while fully recognizing issues associated with privacy, ethical conduct, and of course, measuring the right things that we want to do. So when we look at it that way, what do we do then? Well, we want to try to, you know, create that initial database, right? And we can do that in a number of ways. There are a variety of off-the-shelf software packages that enable us to do that very specifically and very well. You know, we can develop these, as we call them, customer information files with varying levels of specificity. So we can develop these kind of things. We can then analyze this database and engage in data mining accordingly when we mine that data out of the database, which can be quite involved. You know, I mean, some of the research that I've been involved in, you know, some of our databases are truly big data. You know, when we were using data, you know, with something like 4, 5, 6 million cases in these data sets, right? Huge, right? But we can mine it, we can get information out of it. And for example, in the research project that I'm talking about, we were able to analyze online consumer journeys, which were captured by clicks, you know. So, you know, we were able to determine, you know, location and time of each click. And with that, we could analyze, you know, consumer journeys online, and in turn, through data mining and through analytical techniques and statistical analytical techniques, come up with personas and descriptions of types of consumers. So we could develop these consumer personas purely based on click streams, you know. So it's a whole thing, you know. And yeah, I could talk more about it, but I want to continue going here. The bottom line is that it's very sophisticated and we can do that, right? We have that technological ability to do that. And we can do a whole bunch of things as marketers accordingly. So yeah, from that though, we can analyze and we can calculate and determine lifetime customer value. We can determine various metrics, acquisition costs, and that kind of a thing, right? It enables us then to, you know, analyze consumers, understand consumers, determine which customers we want to keep and which customers we want to fire, right? Because there are some customers that are far too demanding. They take up way too much time. They are overly price sensitive and they don't want to pay for things. And at the end of the day, it's just not profitable for us to keep these customers. So therefore, we may, emphasize the word may, want to think about firing these kinds of consumers, you know? So that's something to bear in mind, you know? But what is the cost of retaining some of these customers, right? So we need to consider that. And then, of course, you know, we want to reach out and target these customers, and we can do it direct marketing. We can reach out, contact them, touch them, offer them specific, you know, sales promos. We can do all that, right? We can offer them perks and different products, et cetera, using much of what we've just talked about during the front end of our session this evening. We then, of course, engage in relationship marketing, right? We want to enhance satisfaction on the part of the consumer. Again, we want to try to generally maximize value, manage value, right? We want to try to manage our loyalty programs if we have that and if that is important to us. And I talked at length about loyalty programs at the front end of our session this evening. So these are things we want to talk about, right? Mass customization. We want to think about, you know, community building, brand community building, perhaps. Brand communities are very important to us generally as marketers. So these are things we want to think about. And all the while, we want to recognize the importance of privacy and privacy issues, and information on consumers. We need to be very, very cautious of that and behave in a very, very ethical way and secure that data very, very carefully. And so, yeah, we can develop these metrics, based on retention, profitability, consumer acquisition, consumer retention, conversion and sales and all this kind of thing. So we can capture all this information and make decisions accordingly. So this is all here embedded in this notion of customer relationship management. Very much, it's grown to be very much a technological kind of exercise, but I would argue it's facilitated by technology, but it is still very much a marketing kind of an exercise. A lot of the IT folks, in organizations, they tend to take ownership of this kind of a thing, and they tend to think of it as an IT function, when in actual fact it is not. It is very much squarely a marketing effort here, as facilitated by IT and technology, I would argue. But then I'm a marketer, right? So in conclusion then, we've spoken about sales promotion and how important it is. And you should see then that when we talk about sales promotion and those types of sales promotion we talked about, consumer trade, retail, those types of sales promotion and all the other aspects associated with sales promotion, you can see then how that piece stands in contrast to direct marketing, to advertising, personal sales, to PR, to publicity, and all those other things, right? So you see then, right? Very, very important. It's a real standalone type of a marketing communicative effort, right? Lots of types. And we also recognize then the importance overall of customer relationship management, recognizing the critical foundational aspects associated with loyalty and commitment. And we talked about how to facilitate it through that framework that I offered you. So therefore, ladies and gentlemen, as we wrap up tonight, and I look at the clock and I see that we are on time, on target, being very respectful of your time, we just want to close off by saying that next class, next Monday, we'll be talking about another favorite key topic of mine, service marketing, my real specialty and area, service marketing. And we also recognize that you are well prepared and positioned. And I see in a couple of comments, some of you already have, which is great. You're certainly well prepared to read chapter 14 of the book if you have not already done so. But like I say, I see some of you have, and that's good. Very good. So, so that's it for this evening, ladies and gentlemen. Have a good evening. Stay cool. Rock on. Study hard for that final exam, eh? Study hard for that final exam. Review your notes. Refresh your notes. Go through all that stuff. Learn it and learn it well. Yes. Good night, everyone. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Have a very good evening. Good night, everyone. Stay cool. Rock on. Peace be with you. See you.